JD Vance had been driving for hours, his eyes fixed on the long stretch of empty highway ahead. The world around him felt like a blur, nothing more than the occasional passing tree or a sign signaling a new town. He wasn't on his usual path, just wandering, a man trying to escape the constant noise of life. The weight of his public persona, the heated debates, the media glare, the political battles, had begun to wear him down. He needed a break. The small town he'd just entered wasn't on his itinerary, but there was something comforting about its simplicity. When he saw the small diner with a faded neon sign boasting best pie in the county, he felt a sense of quiet anticipation. The thought of a warm meal, a place to sit in peace, away from the chaos, was exactly what he needed. Little did he know, this stop would turn out to be anything but peaceful. It was about to be a moment that would shift the course of his entire evening, and maybe even his life. The diner was modest, tucked away on a sleepy street. It wasn't a bustling metropolis or a trendy hotspot, just a place that had been standing for decades, its history embedded in the walls. There was an unmistakable charm about the place, with its worn-out booths and mismatched chairs. The flickering fluorescent lights above seemed to hum, and the smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air. JD stepped inside, not expecting anything more than a quick meal and some time to himself. But the moment the door swung shut behind him, he felt something in the atmosphere change. It wasn't just the usual quiet hum of a diner. It was thicker, more tangible, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Conversation slowed, eyes turned, and there was a collective shift of energy, as if the room was processing his presence in ways he didn't quite understand. The couple at the counter stopped talking, glancing over at him with wary eyes. The elderly men at the back kept their voices down, their heads slightly turned in his direction. It felt like everyone in the diner was waiting for something to happen, and JD could feel it in his bones. The hostess, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray curls, walked up to him with a clipboard in hand, a friendly smile plastered on her face. But there was something hollow about it, something that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry, we don't serve your kind here," she said, her words flat and matter-of-fact. There was no hesitation in her voice, no warmth, no attempt at politeness. It was a direct, cold refusal that hung in the air like a heavy cloud. JD blinked in disbelief, wondering if he had misheard her. He looked around, noticing the odd tension in the room, a room that had gone from calm to tight-lipped in the blink of an eye. The quiet murmur of conversation was replaced with the deafening sound of silence. He was accustomed to hostile environments, to being scrutinized, but this felt different. The way the diners looked at him, the way the hostess stood her ground without offering a shred of explanation, it was as if his mere presence was enough to change the very fabric of the room. Wait before you continue. Click on the subscribe button if you are a fan of JD. We want to know how many JD lovers are in the United States. Let's continue. JD's immediate instinct was to leave. Most people in his position would have gotten angry, maybe stormed out, or even made a scene to make their frustration known. But JD didn't do that. Instead, he stood there, still as a stone, and asked the simple question that everyone in that room was waiting to hear. Why? His voice was calm, steady, and there was no hint of confrontation in it, just the genuine curiosity of a man who had been thrown into an unexpected situation. The room, frozen in awkward tension, didn't know how to respond. The hostess avoided his gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the question, and a few heads turned to look at the manager, who had been watching from the corner of the diner. JD's question wasn't a demand for justification. It wasn't a challenge to her decision. It was an invitation to speak, to explain, to engage in something that had been lacking in the room: dialogue. For a moment, the only sound in the diner was the soft clink of silverware, the deep breath of a room collectively bracing itself for what might come next. Ray, the manager, a tall man with graying hair and an apron that looked like it had seen better days, finally stepped forward. His face was lined with worry, the weight of his position clear in his furrowed brow. He paused for a moment, clearly thinking about his words before speaking. "It's not personal, JD," Ray began, his voice low and hesitant. "It's just we've got rules in this town. Things are complicated." JD raised an eyebrow. Rules? Ray nodded, running a hand over his graying beard. Yeah, it's a small town. Not everyone agrees with your politics. It's been like this for a while now. JD's stomach tightened. He had dealt with division before, but never in a place like this. This wasn't a heated debate on television or a protest outside a rally. It was a simple diner in a small town where the conversation felt like it had already been decided before it even started. So, you're saying I'm being denied service because of what I stand for? JD asked, his tone softer now, less accusatory. Ray shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple, he muttered. But yeah, people don't exactly welcome you around here. The room, still silent, seemed to hold its breath. JD could feel every eye on him. He could almost hear their thoughts. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything he represented. His career, his opinions, his role in a divided nation. To them, JD wasn't just a man walking into a diner. He was a symbol of a larger, more painful divide that had found its way into every corner of the country. For a moment, JD considered leaving. But then, something inside him shifted. He realized that if he walked out now, nothing would change. The divide would remain, the tension would linger, and the people in this room would continue to avoid what needed to be said. What JD hadn't expected was that this wasn't just about him. It was about a community, a town, and a nation that had learned to avoid difficult conversations rather than face them. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. I'm not here to argue with anyone. I just want a meal. But I also know that avoiding the hard conversations isn't going to solve anything. You can't keep pretending the divide isn't real, because it is. But you can choose how you handle it. A murmur rippled through the room. Ray shifted, his gaze softening. The elderly men in the back exchanged glances, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and hesitation. It was clear that JD's words had struck a chord, even if they weren't sure what to do with them yet. One of the older men, a wiry fellow with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, spoke up. Maybe it's time we all started talking instead of taking sides. Another nodded slowly. Yeah, we've all got our reasons for being bitter, but we got to start somewhere. JD's heart began to lift, just slightly. He wasn't sure if this conversation would change everything, but it felt like the first step. He wasn't going to win over everyone in that room in a single moment, but if they could listen, even for just a second, that was enough. Ray finally exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. I guess maybe you're right, he said, his voice quieter now. Maybe it's time we stopped avoiding the truth. We've been living in this bubble, thinking that if we ignore the problem, it'll go away. But it won't. JD stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The tension in the room had shifted, softened. The diners weren't all convinced, but they were thinking. The hostility was gone, replaced by the raw, uncomfortable honesty of people facing their own fears. Before JD could say another word, the hostess spoke up, her voice no longer cold but tentative. You're still welcome to stay and eat if you want. JD smiled, not because he'd won anything, but because something had shifted in that room. A crack had appeared in the wall of division, and for the first time, it felt like it might be possible to rebuild. I think I'll come back tomorrow, he said, his smile genuine now. Maybe we can all sit down and share a meal then. As he turned to leave, there was a subtle, unspoken shift in the air. The murmurs from inside the diner no longer felt like whispers of resentment. They felt like the beginning of something new, something that could one day lead to understanding. Sometimes it only took staying long enough to ask the right question. If you know that you enjoy the story, click on the subscribe button for more video like this, like and share.